Welcome to the Bright Ideas Podcast.
All right. In the interest of time, now let's shift to talk a little bit about at the high level of strategy. So we figured out who our ideal customer profile is, but we still kind of have to have a strategy before we start just randomly writing blog posts. So tell me about how you go about developing the strategy of what should I fill my editorial calendar with?
Yeah, so I would say it actually depends a little bit on the business model, and I'll kind of explain how they differ. So if you're a service business, I think the goal of content is a little bit different than a SaaS business. And the reason is because you have a different sales methodology. So in a service business, oftentimes you're sending someone to a salesperson and the person cannot try the service before they purchase it. And so you need to build a lot more trust on the front end versus a SaaS business. The way that I think about the strategy there is the goal is just to get someone to discover it and buy in enough to sign up for a free trial or something like that. And so for a service business, let's take our own agency, for example. When we've talked to a bunch of customers, we try to figure out what are those key problems that they face. And then we're writing posts that are educating them how to solve those own problems for their business in extreme detail and sharing case studies of how we've solved these same situations for other businesses that are just like them so that they can kind of see themselves in one of these examples and say, oh, I actually have that exact problem. And if you solved it for another business, then you can likely solve it for me. Let me reach out to this company and learn more about their services. So that's kind of the way that I think about the strategy for the service businesses, whereas the SaaS businesses are much more keyword driven. And so what we found to work really well there is category keywords. So let's say you are a CRM app, literally going for the CRM software and getting as specific as possible. So oftentimes you said in the very beginning, people aren't specific enough in their content. It's also true when picking keywords. So for example, there's like a help desk app that we work with that is only good for a very specific group of users. It's not help desk software for any SaaS business. It's help desk for people that want a hosted solution or their own. So instead of just going after help desk software, it's actually probably, if someone came across that website, it's probably not going to be a good fit for them because they service a very specific group of users. So going after the extremely specific use cases from a keyword perspective, talking about alternatives. So when we were saying what other products would you use in the space, using that as a keyword strategy as well. So using your competitors' names and alternatives, because if someone is looking for an alternative solution, you can then present your product as the best there. Really trying to figure out what features are the most used in the product so that when someone's searching for a potential use case, you're showing up for those keywords. And so that's kind of how we think through the strategy for the different types of businesses. So the SaaS businesses are much more keyword driven, whereas the service businesses are much more pain point driven. And then you try to back into a keyword.
So I would add to that when it comes to thinking, because I have a SaaS business and obviously we use content. I think there is I know there's a couple of different strategies which can work very effectively. So the first approach, which has been proven to work by many people, is long form content, or as Brian Dean likes to call them, power pages, where you're producing a comprehensive guide to whatever. And you're writing 5,000-6,000 words in a single post. And the reason that works well is you're actually not necessarily writing for your audience, you're writing for the authority sites that have your audience that would be willing to link to your piece of content because it's such an incredibly valuable piece of content. So Brian Dean with Backlinko has done a phenomenal job of this. And I don't see too many other people, like I've interviewed over the years, many folks on the topic of content marketing. I used to have a content marketing agency years ago, and that generally wasn't the conventional wisdom. Everyone was saying, hey, produce your content for your target audience. So that's the first subtle shift. So that's one of the things that we do is we look at, well, who has our audience? What are they writing about now? And if we write something that is aligned with that and it's exceedingly comprehensive, are we stacking the odds in our favor to get that super valuable link? And obviously, when you could start getting links from authority sites in your niche like that, your domain rating is going to go up and all of your content is going to rank higher. So then when you decide, well, I'm going to produce some, to use your words, Benji, some very specific keyword focused content, some more short content, maybe it's only 800 words, that you have a much higher chance of getting those shorter pieces of content to rank. The other thing that these really long pieces of content are great for is if you have a 5,000 or 6,000 word post, you can literally rank for dozens, if not hundreds of different long tail keywords, especially if you craft the content correctly. And there's a number of software tools out there that help you to be able to do that. The second type of content that we're doing is, and it's really become popular lately, is, and I think you can search for this hashtag called Build in Public. And this was, I first ran across this years ago. There's a company, it's a ticketing software called Groove HQ. Alex Turnbull is the founder. And to his credit and his genius, way back before anybody was doing this that I'm aware of, he was writing literally about what he was doing and failing at and succeeding at to grow his company. And he was writing to add as much value in terms of teaching his audience of small business owners what was working for him when it came to growing his organization. Was he directly pitching his ticketing software? No, not at all. Was he writing about the top 10 features you should have on ticketing software and the top 10 this about ticketing software? Not at all. But what he was writing about was the thing that his audience was most interested in, which was how to grow their respective businesses. And of course, the byproduct of that is that he built a great deal of affinity over time with that audience and then credibility. And as a result of that, because his ticketing software, much like my SOP software, could be used by quite a number of different businesses, the fact that he was successful in building this audience of small business owners lent itself very well to lead generation and conversion efforts.
Yeah, I'd agree. So we actually did, that's how we started our business. So in the beginning of Grow and Convert, when we first had a blog, we wrote about, well, I guess to take a step back, we were unknown people in the content marketing space. And so to prove to everyone that we could grow a site and that they should trust us, we did build our site from scratch and showed everyone how we thought about our strategy and how we were driving traffic. And we set a public goal of growing to 40,000 readers per month in 6 months. And the reason for that goal is I had come from another company where I had grown the blog to 35,000 readers in 6 months. And so I wanted to beat my own goal.
I love it.
Some learnings on that though. I would say that the strategy should shift a little bit once you really define what the company is. Because one thing that we noticed is that strategy attracts a lot of people that want to be you and not necessarily your best customers. And so, for example, in the content marketing space, that strategy would work really well for our course, teaching other people how to do content marketing, but it wouldn't work very well for selling a larger business on your service. And so it worked really, really well to gain an initial audience quickly. And then we had to kind of pivot our strategy and focus more on case studies and how we did content marketing for various businesses rather than speaking about ourselves all the time.
So now, and the same thing happened for Groove too, by the way. So I completely agree with what you said. So now let's talk about the actual process of content production. So content production, you can hire writers, you can work with agencies, you can work with freelancers. There's all sorts of ways to actually get fingers to push buttons on the keyboard. But in order to get the highest quality output possible, regardless of who's actually pushing the buttons, it does behoove you to have a framework of some kind, whereas you've got maybe it's a fairly detailed post outline. You may have a standard operating procedure that defines, okay, so these are the attributes that the introduction paragraph has to have, and the post must have 7 different headlines, and it must have 2 to 3 sentences per paragraph. It must have 5 sentences in each, or 5 paragraphs in each section, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what are some of the things that you that come to mind for you, Benji, when you think about making sure that you get the highest quality output possible?
Yeah, I think there's 2 pieces to that question. There's just who writes the content, and so I can kind of explain a little bit about that. And then the second piece is just what is the process to actually get that piece written. So in terms of hiring, we've tried just about everything in terms of, do you hire freelancers? Do you hire people with industry expertise? What is the right background of a writer? What we've landed on is you want to hire a smart writer who is actually not a blogger, because what we found is bloggers have really bad habits, such as the Google research paper example that I shared earlier. Mm-hmm. And instead of completely outsourcing the idea, so what most companies do is they just say, hey, here's a topic, go write on it. Instead of doing that, the writer should act as a journalist and interview someone inside of the company who is a subject matter expert on the topic. That way, the company voice and expertise comes through in the content. And so you can truly educate someone from the brand's perspective, rather than, let's say, interviewing just some random subject matter expert in the industry, because the subject matter expert in the industry might not share the same opinions and perspective as the company. And so that's kind of the process that we use. Is we have a very lengthy hiring process of multiple test projects. And then once we find the person, they're responsible for interviewing someone inside of the company and then turning that interview into a fully written blog post. And then some of the details in terms of how we actually do that, we have a questionnaire that we require the writer to fill out prior to the interview that takes care of some of that initial research. So let's say we're going after a specific keyword. We want to see, we need to analyze the search results and see what is the intent of this search. So what type of blog post is Google ranking more often than not? Is it a list post? Is it a how-to? Yeah. So it starts there. And then, okay, let's say we decided to how-to. We have the writer fill out, what is the big idea of this article? What are some of the main points, and do an initial outline. And that's what they come prepared to the interview with, so that it's very specific, and they can kind of go down this list of points that need to be filled in from whoever they're interviewing. And that way we can make sure that we extract all the right information for the piece, and then we go write it. So that's kind of the process that we use.
So the big takeaway when it comes to getting your content effectively produced is the more preparation and legwork you do before fingers hit keyboards or you hit the record button on the camera if you're recording, the much better your output's going to be. The worst case scenario is, hey, we need a post on email marketing. Can you write one for me? That's not going to turn out very well. Whereas if you say, hey, we need to post on email marketing, we need to cover these 7 subtopics. And so here, content expert who's not going to be the writer, but who's the expert, here's what these topics are going to be. Okay, now we're going to hit the record button. I'm going to ask you these questions. You're going to give me an answer. We're going to produce a video or an audio file. Either way, we're going to transcribe it. So now we have the thought leaders, experts, words clearly hashed out with all the ums and the ahs and whatever on a page. Now we're going to let the writer take that and turn it into an effective article that matches that outline that we came up with to begin with.
Yeah, completely agree.